Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to have the opportunity, and I apologise if my voice goes. I've still come over quite a heavy cold, but I think it's probably appropriate that in a conversation about taxes I sound like death. First, I just want to talk maybe about, about the political context. I want to welcome the tenor of the offer made by the Cabinet Secretary to engage with all the political parties. Colleague Kate Forbes also spoke about being collaborative, and I think Gillian Martin made a very important point earlier on about, as much as it engendered laughter in response, I need to get out of our entrenched positions and work together collaboratively. This is, as the Cabinet Secretary said, it is a parliament of minorities. There will be a need to compromise, there will be a need for responsibility. I've just begun, if you could please let me continue to develop my point. There will be a need to compromise, there will be a need for responsibility both with the government and the opposition, and equally it's also important not to prejudice that process. This is just a beginning, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's reiteration that the discussion paper will be published ahead of the budget. But I think what I'd like to really sort of set out is I think we have to take cognizance of the economic context that we're operating within. We've seen inflation, CPI inflation, in the UK up to 2.9%, a joint highest in the last 5 years. That's ahead of wage growth. And I think that's important because when we're talking about behavioural impacts, it's not about just tax relocation potentially, it's about consumer spending and the knock-on effect that has too. I also just want to, there's a point I want to pick up, but actually Bill Bowman, who's not in his place, sort of raised it, and it was the issue of constitutional uncertainty. And for once, I'm going to agree with him, because I think anyone who's read, for example, today the agent summary of a decision-maker panel from the Bank of England on the growth of a number of businesses where the issue of Brexit is amongst their top two concerns, the FSB report on small business confidence falling, and particularly a Fraser of Allender Institute saying that the immediate concern is that the exit negotiations themselves go awry, and the greatest cloud on the immediate horizon remains the Brexit negotiations. And this is something actually that lands squarely at the feet of the Conservative Party. And this makes it a very challenging environment to talk about tax because of the economic environment and the uncertainty that we're facing. And this is something obviously that's been compounded with the Foreign Secretary's approach, who is apparently threatening to resign, though he says, and I quote, that the Cabinet is a nest of singing birds. Well, he seems to be the cuckoo in the nest. And I think if we take cognizance of that, then we can move forward in a way that's considered, and consider proposals based upon some fundamental principles. And I think a few points that have been made is the need to consider tax and spending, not consider... okay, very briefly.
James Kelly.
Sorry, I thank Tom Arthur for taking the intervention. In terms of fundamental principles, do you accept the principle of increasing income tax in order to support greater investment in public services?
Tom Arthur.
I'll come to that. Actually, I'll address the Labour amendment specifically because it says that income tax should be increased to allow greater investment in public services. That amendment in itself begs the question. It does, because it asks whether or not there's... I can appreciate prima facie it would seem that simply putting up income taxes is going to lead to greater revenue, but that is not the case. We know that with the additional rate. And again, any implications of adjusting any of the other rates can be reflected upon consumer spending. Now, I am not prejudicing that process, but it has to be a rational, cool, level-headed conversation. It has to be detached from ideology, and it has to be considered in the context of public spending.
Could we stop the shouting from the sidelines, please, Mr.
So
Arthur?
I think it's a principles we have to work at. I can appreciate where the Labour Party is at. It's an easy ask from opposition. Let's put all the bands of tax up. But there is consequences to that. There's behavioural consequences, and in the case of additional rate taxpayers, potential behavioural impacts. I'm sorry, I'm in my last 20 seconds and there's no time in hand. There is obviously the dangers of taxpayers relocating. Now that is, and as my colleagues have made, not having power over dividends, not having power over corporation tax, this could lead to a net loss in revenue. There's much more I'd like to be able to discuss, but unfortunately, Presiding Officer, time is against me.